Moab was a dry land with a heavy past. It was not part of the tribes of Israel, and the relationship between the Moabites and God's people was never the best. But it was there, in the midst of a people alien to the promise, that a woman called Ruth was born. Not much is known about her childhood or who her parents were, but what is known is that she grew up hearing about different gods, different customs, a culture that had nothing to do with the ways of the Lord of Israel. She had no idea that her name, one of many, a Moabite name, would cross salvation history like a flame lit on a dark night. Her life seemed ordinary. A young Moabite woman, married to a foreign man who had come there fleeing famine. A Jew, Naomi's son. Elimelech, his father, had taken the family from Bethlehem to Moab in a desperate attempt to escape the crisis. Ruth entered this story almost like someone who enters a burning house without knowing it. But it wasn't by chance. Nothing was. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. Time has passed. Joy turned to silence. First, Elimelech died, then the two sons, including Ruth's husband. And suddenly, what was left was mourning, dust, and uncertainty. 3 widows. 3 broken stories. 3 paths before them: Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah. It is at this point that life begins to take unexpected turns. Naomi, already aged by grief, decides to return home. Bethlehem, her land, her people, her God. It was the end of the line for her, or so she thought. On that dusty road with the sun beating down hard on her back and her soul heavy from losing so much, Naomi insisted, "Go back, my daughters. I have nothing more to offer. No husband, no future, no hope." It was a sincere request from someone who had lost everything, even the will to go on. Orpah, her eyes watering, hesitates, but eventually gives in. She kisses Naomi affectionately and returns. Ruth doesn't. Ruth stands still, her gaze firm, her heart tight but determined. And then she unleashes words that pierce through time like sharp arrows. "Don't insist that I leave you, and don't force me not to go with you. Where you go, I go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." Those words weren't just beautiful, they were like a covenant of the soul. Ruth wasn't just following her mother-in-law, she was burying her past and embracing an uncertain future. In a place where she would be seen as an intruder, she was exchanging the gods of her childhood for the God of Israel, with no guarantees, no map, just faith. Naomi, who had previously insisted that she stay, now didn't answer. She just walks. And Ruth goes with her. The two continue along the road, one supporting the other, with silence saying what words could not. When they arrive in Bethlehem, the whole town is in an uproar. The people recognize Naomi, but they hardly recognize her at the same time. She is no longer the same. "Don't call me Naomi anymore," she says. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life bitter." And Ruth, standing next to her, quietly observing everything. A foreigner, a widow, poor, but full of courage. Bethlehem was small, everyone knew about everyone else's life, and there was Ruth, the Moabitess, strange in her accent, her customs, her clothes. People looked at her sideways, they whispered. Some even turned up their noses. Widowed, childless, landless, nameless. But what nobody saw was the silent strength she carried. With her belly rumbling and her dignity intact, Ruth decided to get up early and go to work. She didn't have a formal contract, nor was she promised a salary. She went out to pick ears of corn that had fallen in the fields, what was left over, what nobody wanted. It was an ancient law in Israel. The poor could follow the reapers and pick up what was left behind. And so it was, with the sun on her back and a firm heart, that Ruth went into any field. Or rather, she thought it was just any field, but nothing was by chance. The owner of that field was Boaz, a rich, respected man, a distant relative of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. Boaz arrives and notices something different. He sees a woman among the workers, stooped over, gathering with care and respect. He asks, "Who is she?" The answer is full of prejudice. She's the Moabitess, the one who came back with Naomi. Boaz doesn't get carried away. He goes to her. He speaks kindly, a rare thing for landowners in those days. He tells her to stay there, that no one will bother her. Let her drink from the servants' water, let her harvest as she pleases. Ruth is frightened by such kindness. She falls flat on her face. "Why are you being so nice to me when I'm a foreigner?" Boaz replies bluntly, "I've heard everything you've done for Naomi. You left father, mother, and land behind. May the Lord, the God of Israel, reward you for that." She thanks him, her heart pounding, not knowing what exactly is beginning there. The next day she returns to the same field, and the next, and the next. Boaz wasn't just another landowner. He was different. He had attentive eyes, a righteous heart, words that carried weight and lightness at the same time. He didn't need to be kind to a Moabitess picking up scraps in her field, but he was. And it wasn't just politeness. There was something there, something he couldn't even explain properly. Every time he passed the field and saw Ruth, he noticed more. The way she bent down to pick up the ears of corn, the way she treated the workers, the respect with which she took care of what wasn't even hers. She didn't ask for anything, she didn't impose herself, she didn't make a scene. But her presence was like a fresh breeze between the rows of barley. He began to give his employees discreet instructions. "Let more ears fall where she is. Don't scold her. On the contrary, help her." Ruth noticed the difference, but didn't know where it came from. She returned home with a full bag, and Naomi began to notice. "Where did you harvest today?" she once asked, surprised at the abundance. "In a field belonging to a man called Boaz," Ruth replied, not knowing the weight of that name. Naomi stopped, her gaze lit up like a candle on a dark night. "Boaz, he's our relative, one of our rescuers." Now the story began to line up in a strange, almost poetic way. The field that Ruth had unknowingly entered, Boaz's unusual generosity, the connection with Elimelech's family, all of this was more than coincidence. It was as if the pieces, which had previously been scattered, began to fit together effortlessly. Ruth kept going to the fields, and Boaz kept noticing her. But even with his kindness, he still didn't go any further. He was respectful, careful. It seemed to contain something that wanted to come out, but it stayed there, stuck between maybe and not now. It was then that Naomi, astute and experienced, hatched a plan. A risky plan, but full of purpose. Time passed, and the barley harvest became the wheat harvest. The fields were still full, the wind kept shaking the ears, and there, in the midst of that routine of sun, dust and work, what was sprouting wasn't just food, it was something more. Ruth and Boaz didn't talk about it, but their eyes did. Each encounter, each exchange of words carried something different, subtle, but strong. He noticed when she arrived. She felt it when he looked at her, and their hearts, although still, were already talking in silence. Boaz was a man of respect. He wasn't the type to act on impulse. He had principles. He knew the responsibilities that surrounded him. Ruth, well, she didn't want to force anything. She didn't see herself as someone who deserved a man like him. She was a widowed Moabitess, reaping what was left, and he was an Israelite man, a landowner, known for his honor. But love, when it's real, doesn't look at the resume. Naomi, smart as only she could be, understood everything. She saw the gestures, the way Boaz treated Ruth with unusual delicacy, and she understood that the moment was coming. But she couldn't wait for Boaz to take the initiative. He was too fair to act without clarity, so she carefully laid out her plan, like someone who prepares the ground before the seed. "My daughter," she said to Ruth, "Boaz will be in the field tonight, cleaning the barley. Bathe, perfume yourself, put on your best clothes. When he lies down, go over there, find his feet and lie down. He'll understand what that means. It was daring, it was brave, and most of all, it was an act of faith. Ruth didn't hesitate. Night fell over Bethlehem like a thick blanket. The smell of the harvest still hung in the air, mixed with the fine dust of the day's work. In the field, Boaz finished sorting the grain, ate some, drank some wine, and, tired, lay down next to the pile of barley. Silence overtook the field. Only the sound of crickets and the wind broke the darkness. Ruth waited. Every step she took on the land felt like a drum beating in her chest. Dressed simply but clean and perfumed, she walked with the care of someone carrying more than a body. She was carrying a request, a hope, a choice that could change everything. When she got close, she saw Boaz sleeping. He was breathing deeply, calmly, unaware that something unexpected was about to happen. Ruth knelt down, slowly pulled up the end of the cloak that covered his feet, and lay there, on the cold ground, in the dark. She didn't say a word. She just lay there. Hours later, in the middle of the night, Boaz woke up startled. Something had moved at his feet. He sat up, tried to make sense of it, and there she was, a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked in a low voice, still confused. "I'm Ruth, your servant," she replied firmly, but with her heart racing. "Spread your cloak over me, for you are a rescuer." At the time, this gesture had a clear meaning. It wasn't seduction, it was an honor. It was a request for redemption, protection, and commitment. Boaz remained silent for a second that seemed like an eternity, and then, with a twinkle in his eye, he replies affectionately, "May the Lord bless you, my daughter. You've been even kinder now than before, because you haven't run after young men, rich or poor. Don't be afraid. I'll do whatever you ask." Boaz was a man of his word. It wasn't enough to have the will. He had to do everything the right way. And even though his heart went out to Ruth, there was one detail in the law that he couldn't ignore. There was another relative closer to Elimelech, someone with the right to redeem the land and consequently take Ruth as his wife. That night in the courtyard, after hearing her request, Boaz promised to act soon. But he knew that the next step had to be public, clear, with no room for doubt. Before sunrise, he made sure that Ruth returned discreetly to Naomi's house. He wanted no gossip, no noise, just respect. While it was still dark, he filled her cloak with barley and said, "Don't go back empty-handed." When Naomi saw her return, she could see on her daughter-in-law's face that something had happened. But she doesn't hurry. She just says, "Now wait, my daughter. That man won't rest until he's sorted everything out." Early the next morning, Boaz goes to the city gate, the place where important decisions were made. There he finds his closest relative and gathers the elders as witnesses. Without beating about the bush, he presents the situation. "Elimelech's land is available for ransom. Do you want it?" The man was interested. After all, land was worth a lot. But Boaz continues, "If you accept the land, you must also take Ruth the Moabitess as your wife, to keep the name of the deceased." Then the man backs down. Not for lack of interest in the land, but for fear of complicating his inheritance. "I can't do that," he says. He then hands over the right of redemption to Boaz, taking off his sandal, a symbolic gesture that sealed agreements in those days. Boaz wastes no time. In front of everyone, he declares that he will redeem the land and marry Ruth. The city gate was full of people, merchants, travelers, onlookers. But that day, what caught the eye was Boaz's voice, firm, in front of the elders and witnesses. He had not only fulfilled the law, he had done it with honor, with dignity. "Today you are witnesses," he said, loud and clear. "I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and I also take Ruth the Moabitess to wife, to preserve the name of the deceased over his inheritance." The place, which was usually the scene of discussions and practical decisions, became the scene of a sacred commitment. The whole city saw it. No one could say it was done on the sly. Everything was transparent from start to finish, and more than witnessing a transaction, those people witnessed the birth of a new story. The elders stood up and blessed the couple with ancient words full of meaning. They asked the Lord to make Ruth like Rachel and Leah, the matriarchs of Israel. They asked that Boaz be famous in Bethlehem and that his house be like that of Perez, son of Judah. It was as if heaven had stopped for a moment to listen to those words. Meanwhile, Ruth went on with a full heart and a steady gaze. She was no longer the Moabite widow who gathered leftovers. Now she was the wife of a righteous man, respected by the people, welcomed by the land that had previously treated her with suspicion. Boaz's house was filled with life, and in time, so did Ruth's womb. She became pregnant, and when the boy was born, the baby's cry sounded like a new melody among those ancient walls. His name was Obed. Obed was born bringing light where before there was only shadow. A baby, yes, but full of meaning. When the neighbors heard about the birth, it wasn't Boaz's name that first came to people's lips. It was Naomi they heard singing again. The woman who said she had returned empty now had a full lap. The boy, though Ruth's son, was seen as Naomi's son too. It was as if God had sown hope into the womb of time. And there was Ruth, the foreigner who arrived in silence, picking up what fell to the ground, now caring for the son who would change the history of a nation. Obed grew up surrounded by affection and honor. He was an ordinary boy in the eyes of many, but God's eyes already saw what lay ahead. Time passed. Obed grew up and had a son. This son was named Jesse, a name that was still simple, still discreet. But it carried a lineage that was beginning to take shape, like a root that goes deep into the earth before breaking out. Jesse, in turn, had several sons. The youngest of them was red-haired, small, half forgotten in the fields looking after the sheep. No one had a bet on him, but God had already chosen him. That boy was called David. David, the poet king, the sheep herder who would face giants with stones, who would write psalms and conquer kingdoms. He came from the line of Boaz and Ruth. Yes, from that unlikely union, from that love planted in the midst of mourning, the greatest king in Israel's history was born. And that's when Ruth's story began to take on a proportion beyond anything she could have imagined. Because many, many years later, from the same lineage as David, someone even more awaited would be born. The generations followed like an invisible thread being sewn together by the hand of time. From Ruth came Obed, from Obed, Jesse, from Jesse, David. And from David, centuries later, would be born the one who would change not only the history of Israel, but of the whole world, Jesus. Yes, the Savior came from the lineage of a Moabite woman, widowed, poor, a foreigner, someone who, in the eyes of most, would never have a place in something so great. But God, who sees beyond appearances, wrote her name where many would not dare to look. Ruth's name entered the genealogy of Christ, and this was no accident. It wasn't just a coincidence of blood, it was a divine choice, as if heaven itself were saying, I see whom no one sees. I honor those who love faithfully. I use simple stories to reveal an eternal plan. Boaz wasn't just a good man either. He was like a mirror, a distant reflection of what Jesus would do next. Redeem, welcome, love without demanding anything in return. He didn't see Ruth as a problem to be solved, but as a living promise. And even though he had a claim on her, he waited for the right time, followed the path of justice, and treated every detail with honor. Their story, which began in the silence of the field, tending the ears of corn, ends with an echo of eternal promises. A love that wasn't built on stage, but on the hard ground of life. A relationship born of respect, faith, and the courage to take risks. And even after so many centuries, even after kingdoms have risen and fallen, Ruth's name is still spoken. not for her titles, but for her choice. A woman who decided not to turn back, even though everything said it would be easier. Ruth didn't see visions, she didn't hear God's voice in thunder, but she decided to stay. She decided to love. She decided to keep going when everything told her to give up. And Boaz, with all the power he had, chose not to impose himself. He protected, he waited, he acted justly. Instead of using force, he used honor. And perhaps therein lies one of the greatest lessons. True love doesn't impose itself. It surrenders. It doesn't run you over. It walks with you. It doesn't take advantage. It takes care. Their story shows that God doesn't need impressive CVs to do something eternal. He just needs willing hearts. Ruth was unlikely, but her faithfulness opened up a new chapter in God's plan. She didn't know the end of the story, but she trusted the author. We live in a time when everything is for yesterday, where people want quick answers and immediate recognition. But Ruth teaches us that the harvest comes after patience, that favor comes after faithfulness, and that God writes right, even when everything seems out of line. Boaz teaches that integrity is worth more than shortcuts, that character speaks louder than appearance. He could have taken the easy way out, but he chose the right way. Together, they show that redemption is possible, that new beginnings exist, that a difficult past doesn't cancel out a future full of purpose. And just when we think God has forgotten the details, He's there, building something bigger than we can imagine, sometimes through a Moabite widow, sometimes through us. Because in the end, the story of Ruth and Boaz isn't just about them, it's about the hope that can still reach us. If you enjoyed the story of Ruth and Boaz and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.